You're here on CMajor Before the Show. I'm your host, CMajor Porter, and we're doing something a little different today. Welcome to our Saturday broadcast. Yes, thank you so much for tuning in. I'm so glad you're here. And today is totally unscripted, so just bear with me today because it's early. It's around 6:30 in the morning here on a Saturday morning here on the East Coast in the greater New York City area. And I'm broadcasting this because I want you to have a chance to finish out the keyboard situation series with me. We are on episode 11, if you can believe that. And it's been a long journey. So next week, we will finish out the series with the 12th episode. But today, we are talking about playing a melody and chording that melody. And I think where I left off, I was talking with you about developing your professional keyboard style. So it doesn't matter if you are teaching yourself to play, if you're coming back into piano lessons after being away for a long time, whatever the case may be, you love music enough to pursue it in this way. And so developing your professional keyboard style, I believe I left off with talking with you about some of the jazz pianists that have made significant contributions to jazz. So whether it's boogie, whether it's stride, whether it's swing, bebop, cool, and free jazz styles, we're talking about standing on the shoulders of Jelly Roll Morton and Count Basie, Earl Hines, Art Tatum, Bud Powell, Thelonious Monk, Dave Brubeck, Keith Jarrett, Harry Connick Jr., and many, many others. And of course, women are included in this group, but I'm going to reserve my talk about the contributions of women for another episode. So I hope you will stay with us because we have so many things to talk about here on CMajor Before the Show. And don't forget to join us over at our other broadcast, our sister podcast, the CMajor Radio Show, because over there what we try to do is we try to give you a little bit more literacy. So if you're interested in learning how to write down music clearly, then definitely see us over there. Okay, so our normal background music that I normally play, you won't be hearing that today. You'll just be hearing me noodle around on the keyboard, so I hope you are okay with that. So if you hear little squeaks and little pops, just know that's what that is. So hopefully it's not too distracting for you. But I just wanted to play a few examples, and I'm not going to hold you too long today. What we're aiming to do is have a 3-hour-long broadcast, eventually, 3 hours long. That's a long broadcast. But I think if we shape it in such a way that you get a lot out of it, then you won't mind the 3 hours. And then if you're taking a 3-hour car ride somewhere, you can still listen in. But I'm really excited about it because after all these weeks of doing this podcast and the other podcasts, what I've learned is you really have to be clear about the points that you're making. And you also have to be really sure about what you're going to say. So it doesn't matter if it's scripted, it doesn't matter if it's unscripted, as long as we're clear. And as long as I know what you want to hear. So what I love is that, and I'm not a social scientist, what I love, though, is that I'm able to talk with a lot of you offline. So I know exactly what you want to hear. I know exactly what you want to do. Believe me, I have my finger on the pulse of what many of you are doing with your music making. With piano lessons, outside of piano lessons, what have you, online. I'm watching, I'm listening, I'm talking to you. I hear you. Believe me, I hear you. So we're going to be saying a lot more about that in the future, and just to shape the podcast in a way that can be useful for you. Otherwise, what am I doing? I'm just talking. I don't want to just hear myself talk. And I'm not the expert on this. You have many, many experts that are out there. I'm just a person that loves music enough to want to share with you a little bit of what I know. So, getting back to developing your professional keyboard style, many of the musical characteristics found in the performances of outstanding players, you'll notice that they use, especially in jazz, they use improvisation. And you may just go, well, what is that? Well, you're not born with the ability to improvise. It's a learned thing, so you have to really want to learn how to improvise. Some people don't like to improvise. Some people would rather play something that's composed. That's it. They know how it's going to start. They know how it's going to end. But you have some musicians, and professionals would call them the luckiest people in the world because they get to create on the spot. So if that is your style of music making, then go for it. The jazz student studies the skills and vocabulary of jazz and then uses it in spontaneous ways to create new musical compositions. And I did say something about that, I believe, on the last podcast as well. And it is exciting. It's exciting for the performer. It's exciting for the audiences. It's thrilling for them to watch because they get to see and hear that creativity take place on the spot. So it's not necessarily a calm way to experience music or make music because you really are on the hot seat and you have to know where you're going and what you're doing and what you're aiming to do, and then you have little surprises along the way. So voicing, let's talk about that for a moment. And I'm not going to say a whole lot about it, but I want to just say voicing within the context of picking out a melody. So let's just say that you wanted to put your top melody on the top. Here's a simple melody. And this is straight out of a textbook. So that's just one little melody. All I'm playing is a G, A, B, B, A, G, F, E, D, C. Okay, so it's not really a well-known melody, but you can add to it. So when we talk about right-hand chord voicing, we're talking about top-down voicing. It's used in gospel music. I recall using it when I played in church. I recall using it for other music that I would play outside of church that call for this type of voicing in the right hand. And it's useful also for making sure that when you're playing a song, people know what you're playing. And then you sound professional at the same time. So it's very different than playing a chord structure or just a sequence. It's actually taking a melody and just basically fattening it up. So top-down voicing is a professional technique used in the right hand that will change the sound of your playing immediately. Immediately. It gives prominence to the melody while adding rich sounding harmony just below. So some basic top-down voicings will be something that sounds like that. Okay, so let's go back to our melody we were playing before. So I just played the top melody. Now I'm going to play a third below that melody. So I'm playing the melody, adding a tone a third lower than the top note. And you probably already do this. If you ever played Lean On Me or something like that, on your own, you probably figured out how to chord the melody to that. And so it's the same idea. Now we're going to add a fourth lower than the middle tone and play the full right hand chord. And you can practice doing this. You can practice playing the top melody tone louder than others. Now that's a challenge because you really want to bring that melody out, but it will take a bit of practice. Okay, so this is what it sounds like. So hopefully you got all of that. But let me just go ahead further and just play the right hand melody. This is an original tune. I'm just going to change my my audio here for a second. And you are not imagining things. You are hearing a different audio today. Okay, so hopefully it's enough for you. Okay, so that's one example. Now, give me something that's a little bit more familiar. I won't play the entire song because what I want to do in the future is do an episode about using the pentatonic melody. And so that's going to include this tune that everybody knows. Okay, so that's very well known. I know you know that tune. So, but what if I wanted to chord that melody? So I could do something like this. Okay, and so what you're going to hear me do next week is substitute one of those chords and show you how to put together a gospel arrangement of that, a moderate gospel arrangement of that. Let's say it like that. So just to give you a sneak preview. Okay, that gives you a little bit more of the feel of it, but you're going to be totally surprised about one of the chords that I throw in, and I'll see if you can recognize that, but it should be fun for you to hear and to see if it's something that you want to do for yourself and for your own music making. So, chording a melody, that's what we're talking about today. It's very easy to do, and I would just recommend just trying it out. I mean, there are lots of things that you can do. So that gives you some more ideas of what the sound would be like if you're chording a melody. Right? So it's up to you. I did play a piece that was written by one of my professors, and it seems that he used that a lot in his composition, just the whole chording a melody type effect in his composition. Is very enjoyable. So I might be playing that as well coming up on another episode of the podcast. So thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you. So I'm keeping my promise. I told you that I was going to keep it short today. So very short, as a matter of fact, because I do want to save room for what we'll do next week. So today's episode and next week's episode, we're not going to hold you too long. And then we're going to go into a brand new series altogether. Now, I can already tell you that series is not going to be long at all. In fact, it may be a part 1 and a part 2 type of thing. But it involves coffee and it involves music. So it's an original series, and so I just have my own way of describing things. I try not to copy what anybody else is doing, but at the same time just have fun with it. And so it's just fun. Music to me is just really, really fun. And I know that there are lots of ways to enjoy music making, but I really fight for the idea of having fun in your music making if you can. So, just to recap, we talked about chording a melody today. I also mentioned basic top-down voicings. And what I want to encourage you to do is just take a single line right-hand melody. Like this. Play the third. top note and then add a fourth lower. Okay, and then at the same time, you can also think about how to take a simple melody like Amazing Grace, for instance, and so what I'll do in episode 12 is show you how to build on that. I'm also going to add the left hand, so I don't want you to think I'm leaving the bottom part out. But it's really fun when you start thinking about the many things you can do with chords. I was recently talking with a coworker about how to study music. He's interested in studying music for himself and wants to know if it's best to just commit to learning one song or if it's really best to commit to learning to play the piano in a more formal way. And that seems to be the big question mark. It seems that there's a lot of confusion about that. I don't know why. I think it's because if you take a look at what's going on in social media and you see people doing all these things from 3-year-olds to 5-year-olds to 55-year-olds to 95-year-olds, it can be a little confusing, a little daunting, to see that they can do all these things and you can't do it yet. So don't worry about what you can't do. Make the best music you can make. I think that's been my overall message in the podcast, which has been a surprise to me because at one point in life, I was really gung-ho, just classical. I think you start out, playing the music that you can by ear. For me, that was a song that I heard on television, which got me into really playing music. But then once you start to learn how to do it on a more formal level, it just kind of stays with you. And that's what happened in my case. So speaking of which, one of the first songs that I learned when I started to read music was something by Bach. So that's just for demonstration purposes. So I'm not trying to perform it in a way that's going to sound like what you hear on a professional recording, but just to give you an idea, on instruments that can play chords, this is a really good example of how to play broken chords and how to mix up your sound. So that's J.S. Bach's first Prelude in CMajor. And so if you broke it down to just play it as block chords, because we have talked about that, you would get this. Right? And then your bass. So just think of, there's so many ways that you can chord a melody, you can play a melody made up of chords. You can do whatever you want as long as you have a good imagination, you're creative, and you're open to new ideas. So here's another example of broken chords. Right? So that type of playing in the left hand is known as Alberti Bass, and it was named after the Italian composer Mr. Alberti, who popularized it. So arpeggios are another way of expressing yourself on the piano. So we're not going to be talking about that too much as we round out the series, but I just wanted to throw that in so you can also think about some other things you can do with melody and how you can play chords to express yourself on the piano. So tune in again next week because we will be rounding out our series. Okay, so I actually won't start with that part in the episode, I'm going to start with a different part. So I'm going to start with... I'm going to start there, and then I'm going to end with... Okay, so I really want you to tune in for that to see what I do with this melody. Okay, how am I going to chord that? Okay, so I guess in a way that can kind of be your homework if you want to look at it. Yes, did you do your homework? So hopefully you had a chance to look over at CMajor's classroom, because I did post some things over there for you to take a look at. And so if you want to get ahead on next week's episode, start looking at Amazing Grace, looking at ways that you can chord that, looking at some things that you can add to it. What types of chords would you use for Amazing Grace? Would you still just stick with, regular C, F, and G if you're playing it as a sequence? Or, if you're chording it, okay, how would you do that? How could you make it sound a little bit more, to use a coffee turn, extra? How can you make it sound a little bit more extra? So we'll be talking about that on the next podcast. So thank you so much again for joining me today. It's been a great pleasure being with you. It's been a great pleasure being with you today. So I'll keep you in suspense until next week. Let me play my suspense sound. Yes. Because you definitely want to tune in to see what I'm going to do next week with Amazing Grace. So I'll see you then. Until then, make the best music that you can make. Have fun. I hope you have a terrific day. Hope you have a terrific weekend. And as always, thank you so much for listening to CMajor Before the Show. If you can, join us this evening. I'm going to be with you this evening on the CMajor radio show tonight. It's scheduled for 7 p.m. Hopefully we can start on time, and hopefully we can get that broadcast up and running for you. We've had some technical issues, but hopefully we don't run into that today. Okay, so I'm going to play you out, and then I'm going to stop this podcast, and I'll see you next time. Thank you for listening.